All right.
There it is.
Welcome to, we are live, right? I think we've got a little bit of a delay, I think, on YouTube.
It's a little bit.
Just a little bit. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Engineering Reason live stream and podcast. I'm your co-host, Deb, and this is Kevin from Engineering Politics podcast and YouTube and locals, by the way. So you can catch Kevin on Engineering Politics at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. He's about to introduce himself to those people who don't know him, though, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. So I'm one of those conservative content writers and podcast guys that everyone loves. I always hear that everyone loves these conservatives. So happy to represent this group that's so beloved all over the internets.
Yes.
And media. But the difference that I try to make compared to, I would say, some of the other guys, big or small, is I try to explain these conservative principles or my ideas in a way that isn't going to turn everyone off. I want to explain it in a way that's going to allow people to really understand where I come from and where a lot of people, who sit on my side of the aisle come from. I'm a conservative just because I happen to align with people who call themselves conservatives. I don't try to align my ideas with what they think. So, I try to, explain my views and also steelman the other side as well, because I don't want to put up a weak straw man to be fighting against. So I try as hard as I can to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And we do love you. We love the conservative point of view. I think I keep telling people on my channel, when I think of conservative, I think of what's worth saving, like what's worth conserving or at minimum protecting from capricious change. There's progress and there's just change.
Right.
And so we need the tension of conservatism to make sure that people don't just change things. Don't fix what's not broken. And in particular, I think of the hard line that I defend, even though I don't call myself a conservative. What I'm looking to conserve is those principles, those limiting principles of limited government. That's where I hang out. So people will often say, well, they're like a libertarian, because I tend to be fairly libertarian when it comes to fiscal policy, also to a certain degree, social policy. But I can get real conservative real fast when people want to talk about rights.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is conservative and progressive are defined by the context in which they're in. And that context is the nation's founding principles, typically. So conservative in America is different than conservative in Europe. Progressive in Europe, I would say progressive in Europe and progressive in America, they're much more closely aligned, because the problem with progressivism is, where are you progressing towards? You don't always progress towards good things. But on the other side of that coin, you don't always conserve great things. And a lot of times in conservative context, especially in Europe, they conserve these rigid hierarchies. There are people afraid to get rid of the status quo, in which there are certainly some conservatives in America who do that as well. But the conservative movement is largely based on conserving founding principle. Right. So they always want to maintain that. And there's an interesting thing. So Truman of Return to Reason, if you guys are familiar with my work, I do a lot of stuff with Truman. And we're doing this really cool thing called the Road to Serfdom Project, where you read The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek. And we're going to kind of do like a book review of it. And we're going to do like a weekly podcast on it. But an interesting thing he brought up is the difference in the term liberalism in Europe, especially around World War II, when he wrote that book, it was 1944, compared to in America, how it has already changed at that time. Right. And he said, liberalism in Europe was to stay away from the government, not allow that government control. Where in now America, they redefine the word liberalism, even back in the 40s, to mean everything but small government. I mean, it was advocating. It's just socialism.
I mean, why beat around the bush? It's like, and at this point, I said the other day on Twitter, I said, I don't even think anymore it's worthwhile to talk about conservatives and liberals and things like that. We have two groups now in America. We have Americans and we have anti-Americans. And underneath that, there are a bunch of different views, but there literally are people who are, would call themselves, say, well, I'm a liberal, but I want to keep the Constitution and I want to, whatever. And then you have the people who are like, no, America sucks. It's a racist, white supremacist country. I want to do away with it. I want to tear up the Constitution. And, they're not even specifically calling for socialism per se. I think they just want to be parasites. I think their attitude, they just want to just be parasites. They would
socializing
like to
power more than it's in the
yeah, I
realm of
don't think
economics.
they have this vision of like, Leninist kind of, or the Soviet type communism. I don't think they even know what it is. They haven't learned enough history to know what it is. I think they just think they have magical thinking, and they believe that they just take the stuff and the power away from the people who have it, and they imagine who that is. They're wrong, but they imagine who that is. And then, they'll have all the stuff. They just want to flip things around from in the binary they believe exists. But of course, it isn't a binary system. It doesn't work like that. They're wrong, and they're going to end up destroying the country. And everything that they think they're going to get out of that is, I don't know what, but they're going to destroy everything. They're very illiberal. The last thing they are is liberal.
Yeah. I mean, for those of you who have not read The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek, I mean, it is a profound book, and that's the reason why, we're going to be covering it. The first episode is going to be coming out Monday, but is covering this exact same thing. It's the socialists, no matter how well intentioned, or collectivists, you can broaden it out to that, no matter how well intentioned they are, very often the product of what they make is an undesirable consequence even for them.
Yep.
So, it's
so frustrating because as a person who cares about education, I refuse anymore to call myself an educator, because that word now has such a negative connotation. People have bastardized that word just like every other word that used to have meaning and value. But as a person who's very concerned with education, it makes me so angry, because it's just like we were told back when we were kids, if you don't learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And these people are absolutely ignorant. They talk about the whitewashing of history. And James Lindsay said, no, it's actually been redwashed. Because they didn't teach anybody about communism, like the dark side. Now, when I was a kid, we were taught about it because, the Cold War. I kind of missed the Cold War because we learned communism bad. Commie's bad. We all thought that. Even Democrats were like, commie's bad, And now you see people walking around with Che Guevara shirts, and that's like the least of it. They actively want, I'm a Marxist and I'm very proud of it. And they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. No idea.
The fact that we don't look at the hammer and sickle the same way we look at the swastikas is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy. But so they don't know that. And the other thing that has been washed, has been just like sanitized, is the Democrat washed history.
Yeah.
They've Democrat watched history, and they've actually taken history of the Republican Party and
the big flip. Which is the silliest thing I've ever heard, and I have no idea how people buy into that. The fact that people think that the marketing groups of each political party came together and like, we should switch names, and let's try this out. We've tested some focus groups, and we're like, we're just gonna switch names now, and people just buy into that is silly. But there's a large ignorance, especially of something like economics. I mean, economics, if you study, there's that saying, follow the money, right? And if you follow the money throughout history, you kind of understand the influences on major changes. So I think you and I have talked about a little bit in the past of free market economics influence on ending slavery. Slavery, that was one of the main influences of ending slavery, and people think it's the exact opposite. I think the capitalists are the ones who wanted to keep the slaves. No, they wrote very openly in newspapers about how much they hated capitalism because it's going to equalize the two races. So people, if they would actually learn their history, some historical economics, they would understand that no, it's what freed the most people in the world is the idea of free markets. And that's the reason, I hate to use the word capitalism, because capitalism is not an ism at all. It's a description of behavior. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. And if people would understand that, I think they would start to use it a bit differently, and at least think about their actions in the market, more responsibly, rather than trying to say, all right, daddy government, you do this for me. I don't want to worry about healthcare. You give it to me for free.
Exactly. And they don't understand. They don't know where stuff comes from. And where it's most evident now is in the attempt to redefine the curriculum, to build in all this touchy feely. And I don't want to even, in the Zoom call I just had for my locals community, there was a gentleman on who's been working on a math. He's been looking at the California math framework, what they want to do to mathematics in California specifically, but they're doing it all over the country. It's really pronounced there. And we were reading through some of what the California math framework said. And it's Fantasyland. It's Fantasyland. We don't, like, mathematics is about power, and it's going to be made available for everyone now. Like it was somehow held in a box. And, they actually have written into part of it, well, mathematics used to be reserved for, rich white boys going to Harvard. And I'm like, this is written into the freaking framework. And they're talking about teaching math as if it's this, we don't really need to learn the exact math anymore. They have calculators and computers. They just need to have math fluency. But to them, what math fluency means is just being able to explain how they arrived at their wrong answer. That's good. Oh, well, see, I thought that 6 times 4 was 28. So that's how I came into this wrong. That's good. Okay. You explained it. It is insane. I mean, when you actually read through it and you realize that they are, in the name of freedom and liberation and equity and all this, they are going to enslave an entire generation of people in stupidity, artificial stupidity.
Yeah, I mean, it's
insane.
This crazy switch they made between equality and equity. They're so hyper focused on eliminating disparate outcomes. This is how they arrive at that. And when you understand that factor, it's pretty easy to understand why they would change math like this, right? Because standards create disparate outcomes. So the easiest way to eliminate disparate outcomes is to eliminate standards. And so, you have a complete changeover in that you don't even look at how these kids are learning, or if they're learning, or where they should be compared to kids, in the past. If they're doing math at a 4th grade level and in 12th grade, that's not a big deal as long as they're all, relatively equal and no one's standing out. I mean, this is what's going to happen. And you put it, perfectly. It's this enslavement of stupidity that we're going to end up in future generations, because, it used to be the, I forgot what it was called. The, and I don't remember. It's normally when they try to, redistribute money to different races, and it's man, I forgot the phrase now.
Well, they want to redistribute according to, some kind of, they want equitable distribution according to race. And one of the things I was talking about with the group was, when did it become bad that some people in the world were smarter than you? And I'm not talking about race. I mean, they were brilliant, black mathematicians of the 1700s. I'm talking about just the fact that we are supposed to all, they even said mathematics is, accessible to all and everyone should achieve. And it's like, no. I mean, arithmetic, yes, but to deny advanced students advanced math until they get to 10th grade, it's probably too late by then. I mean, if the kid's really good at math, it shows up early. Shows up very early, probably like 2nd or 3rd grade. You see the kid just go gobbling up math, and they want more. So why is it bad? Why does they even say that it makes other children feel bad, and they internalize how, wrong it is that somebody else is moving faster and all this stuff that, first of all, there's no evidence to support that's even true. Okay. I mean, I knew there were kids in my class who were better at math than I was. And I didn't sit there and say, well, that's just not fair that the math knowledge was inequitably distributed. And, he has more, it's obviously some kind of sexism that he has more math knowledge than I was better at math. It just never occurred to me. And in fact, the older I got, because of the way I was taught about great inventors and how people use math to do wonderful things, engineering, build bridges, build airplanes, whatever, I would start being super grateful that I didn't have to do all the math. There were some really brilliant people out there that could do the cool math to make the cool stuff to make society awesome. So I could have digital this and computers and that and the other. And all I had to do was enjoy it while the brilliant people go, please make more, let the brilliant people fly so I can have nice stuff, cheaper, faster, better, and my life will be better. And I don't have to do it. I can do the things I'm good at, because guess what? We're all good at different things. That's how I was taught. And we apparently live in a world where it hurts the precious widow feelings that they're not equally as good at everything as everybody else. Now, I say that to the teachers and the curriculum developers, not the children. Tiny children don't think that way. This is adults projecting their own insecurities onto these kids. The kids are like, you're really good at drawing. Yeah, well, you're really good at building. Well, they're not doing that. They pick up on it from us. So if we come back at them going, everyone's good at different things. We all have our different gifts. And you know what? The important thing is you do as well as you possibly can and try your hardest. That's what's really important. And you do need to know some basic stuff to do money and this and that. But if you don't do calculus or trig, it's not the end of the world. Okay. But you do need to do these basics. And the good news is there's some geniuses that will get us to Mars, and it doesn't have to be you. I mean, I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah. So what I was trying to think of before is the phrase "the soft bigotry of low expectations."
Yeah,
has turned to the overt bigotry of no expectations. Yep. We don't do a service to kids by not applying standards to their work. So they understand what they need to improve on, and that just hurts them in the end. And like what you said before, someone captured a great tweet by some blue check mark who's, made a complaint that, me working 8 to 10 hours a day and then getting to enjoy 2 hours in the evening while I, try to scarf down dinner and rest and relax and then get 2 days off a week, to do the things that I actually want to do. That's capitalism for you. Like that's what you get with capitalism. It's like, well, like, what do you do on your off times? You sit on your phone, you watch TV, all these other things, these devices that capitalism gave you. It's like, without this, like, where would you be? Like, if you want to abandon capitalism, okay, go out, buy yourself some land on, middle of the place, nowhere, don't have any internet, don't have any TV, nothing like that. Like, how far do you get?
Exactly.
So you hate the system that's bringing you all these things that make you, that entertain you.
Yeah.
But the problem is there, I think, that particular individual is not finding that meaning there. They think the meaning is supposed to be leisurely time. That's their meaning in life. Well, people who think that that's their meaning in life end up being depressed real quick, unfortunately.
Well, and there are a lot of really depressed people. And, you can find meaning in hard work. I, often do. But it doesn't there's no like one right way to find meaning, but there are a lot of really bad ways to do it.
We know the bad ways.
We know the bad ways. And unfortunately, we're replicating them and we're passing them on to our children. And now like what I see is sort of I keep calling it a mass psychosis where, when I use the word projection, I don't use that lightly. That's literally what's going on. We have people who I believe have gravitated towards teaching because they have deep and abiding insecurities and need a sort of easy sense of power. And I'm not trying to indict every single teacher out there, of course. I'm talking about most of your young ones who are currently coming out of teaching programs who agree with everything they're being taught. They like it. They're, the little girl, I don't know if you saw those videos that were going around Twitter about this program, the inquiry-based learning, where they're teaching social studies to fifth graders. And this one teacher, it was so excited because her little students were repeating back to her how racist America was. It just moves her to tears how happy she is about this. We use inquiry. I didn't see the inquiry. They've literally turned the word inquiry inside out, where she's like, now how do we do this? And what does this mean? Parrot, 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 parrot. Little 10-year-old kids parroting back. And she's like, it's so beautiful. And this woman looked sick. I mean, if you look at her eyes, her face, the cat, she had deep sunken circles under her eyes. She looked miserable. Like this was their only happiness, was having had the power over these little 10-year-olds to get them to spit back what she taught them and how effective she was at it. And that's disturbing. If that's where you derive your sense of success, is getting a bunch of 10-year-olds to say a bunch of words that they don't even know what they mean, you need to see somebody about that. And I think we've got lots and lots of people who fall into that category, and they are in turn going to create more people with mental illness. Because if all of your sense of self and identity comes from outside of you, it's super fragile. Anybody can come along and tweak that, poke that, kick it over, and you're in trouble.
I mean, I think when you don't even give kids the chance to develop a sense of identity, because I mean, what you described right there is teachers think that allowing the kids to repeat something is the same thing as learning something.
Correct.
Or teaching something. Like you had a really good video that I watched earlier that, teaching kids how to read or write, they put it in this very formulaic, kind of, here's the box, just put what we want you to put in this box. You don't have to worry about actually developing a thought process in your writing yourself. You're just teaching kids how to fill out a form. Like, that's not actually teaching kids. It's teaching kids how to do this one specific thing that they're not going to do as much in the real world. Or you're not teaching them how to write. You're just teaching them how to do, this very specific thing. And as someone put in the comments here, that students are kind of internalizing this sense of feeling stupid because they think they're shamed by their teachers. I think the problem is the teachers have lost the understanding of how to criticize, because they believe that criticism is the same thing as shaming. And they need to understand that there are constructive ways to criticize kids, to say, hey, you're not at the level you're supposed to be right now. Let me help you. And that's just not getting them any help. It's not preparing these kids for the real world.
Well, if they were actually concerned about kids' self-esteem, if that was even on their list of priorities, the last thing they would be doing, and we've talked about this in these podcasts before, the last thing they would be doing is defining the children for them. You wouldn't have an adult say, you are this. Check off these boxes and fill out this form, and that's who you are. You would never do that. Is such an invasion in their emotional space to tell a young child who they are. They haven't had time to figure that. They haven't been on the planet long enough to understand what an identity is. Mm-hmm. And when an adult comes along and tells you who you are, and it's all kinds of immutable characteristics and externalized things, and then tells you that because of the things I just told you are, encouraged you to check boxes that you are, then other people do feel XYZ about you, people you never met. Okay. You're creating cognitive distortion. You're telling them something will happen, or you're telling them how to explain things that happen in the most negative light, and they will go looking for that. And in fact, you even teach them how to go looking for it. It's called microaggressions. Like, here's how to find all the racism and everything. You're teaching them cognitive distortion. So you're teaching the child the behaviors of depressed people. Depressed people have cognitive distortion, and there are multiple very specific behaviors: binary thinking, emotion-based thinking, emotional reasoning, rather, where you use, like, because I feel, therefore it's true. My feelings are always right. This is how depressed people function. Depressed people abandon reason. Because if you think about it, the way you get through things in life that are not so awesome is you have a little debate with yourself, right? It's like a little argument in your head that something bad happened. Now you have a choice. You can say, well, everything bad happens to me, and it's because of these people are just hateful and horrible. Okay, so that's one argument. Then you're supposed to check that in facts. You're supposed to say, is that really true? Does everybody even know me to hate me? Mm-hmm. And this all happens very quickly if you've learned to do it well. But we're interrupting that process with very young children and preventing them from learning how to do it, and giving them a script instead that is to the negative. You're oppressed. You're a victim. Mm. Oh, you're an oppressor. Yeah. So when good things happen to you, don't be grateful, be guilty.
Yeah. Yeah. That, what I always call is that negative feedback loop that you get in your head. Oh, why is this happening to me? All of a sudden, 2 things in a row happen bad to you, and you kind of fall in this negative feedback loop. It's like, oh man, my life is falling apart and everything's awful. And that is a great thing to teach kids while they have relatively, these problems that aren't going to end their life. And then those problems can manifest themselves in much larger problems when they become an adult, and they're responsible for other kids and other people. But to understand how to break the negative feedback loop without just saying, well, ignore the problem because I'm just going to call you special, and that should be good enough to end your negative feedback loop, or to almost allow them to sit in that negative feedback loop and not find avenues to actually make your life better, but to kind of push that negativity off onto someone else. Because I think that's what a lot of the teachers do, right? When you say you're projecting onto someone, I think a lot of this insecurity and lack of meaning comes from that projection, right? Because when you don't have, when these teachers don't have meaning because they think that meaning comes from calling out people as being racist, or they think that meaning comes from being just happy. Like, I don't like the kind of, like we just talked about, happiness does not provide meaning. Happiness is a symptom of meaning, right? And not understanding that, I think, makes them live much more of a sad life, and they project that on the kids, unfortunately.
Well, did you read that book that Carlin did in her book club, how the subtle art of how not giving a
No, I was going to read a book very similar to it, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I really liked how it defined happiness, that life is a series of problems that you have to try to solve, from teeny tiny ones to really big ones. Okay. And they're just going to keep coming up, and your life is going to have ups and downs, and some of those problems you'll solve effectively and some you won't. So happiness isn't like some destination you get to, or some feeling that you have. It's when you are choosing to solve problems that matter to you, like problems you want to solve, that have meaning to you, that are like that reflect your values, and you're able to do that pretty consistently, or you choose to do that. Like, you actually build a life for yourself, or like, I'm going to build a life where the problems I have to solve every day are problems I actually want to solve. Like, they are appealing to me, even if they're difficult. They're interesting problems to solve. They're, they, whatever it is that are your values, they reflect that. And that unhappiness is when you either don't know how to do that. You don't know how to choose a life that creates those kind of problems for you, but where you look at the problems that come up that we all have to deal with because, we didn't choose them, just random stuff that comes at us, and we get stuck there. That's all that life is. So that's your misery, is that, I don't see any other ways out, and this is, my whole life. And part of that comes from when you don't learn to think, like how to think at a young age, you can get sort of tunnel vision. And that's what I meant by the cognitive distortion keeps you in that negative feedback loop that you're talking about. You don't see that there's another way to go, like a door to walk through over here. Just open the door, go the other way, a kind of learned helplessness sets in, and the problems that you're solving are not problems that you choose to solve, that don't reflect your values. You may not even know what your values are at that point. We're not teaching children. We're teaching them how to define identities, but we're not teaching them how to choose their own values. And in fact, we're imparting values to them that are, I think they're not values. They're beliefs, which is different. And they're beliefs that are not backed up in anything real. They're more like, are we freezing up?
Yeah, I think
Can
you
you hear
went out
me?
on me. I can hear you now, but went out for 5 seconds or so.
Something is up with, something is up with
Can
my
you hear me now?
internet. Yeah, I can hear you now. It must be my internet is wigging out on me. Is it okay now?
Yep, you're good now.
Okay, well, that's weird. So yeah, they are being told, like Truman says, they're being told what their values are, and they are. I don't know that I would call them values. Like, I don't even think they rise to the level of being values. They seem more like edicts or tenets or dogma. It feels very dogmatic. It doesn't feel like a value.
Yeah.
And I wish I were more articulate to explain why I think that. But
Yeah, it's hard to kind of differentiate the values and principles that, there should be some values taught, treat people kindly when you can. I think a big one's viewpoint diversity. Don't just shut down someone who's got a different opinion from you, understand their opinion, and then you can make your own,
Right.
ideas based on that opinion. But the whole point, especially of early education, is give the kids the tools to figure out how to form their sense of identity, how to, find these values, how to, especially a tool when it comes to criticism, is to understand their weaknesses so they can make them better. And the problem is we're not doing that. We're not cultivating that in kids. It's just more of a repeat game and, make them feel good temporarily at the expense of their long time, mental health when they become adults and they realize the real world is not as nice as sitting in a classroom. The teacher just affirms everything you say or makes it easy and to say, hey, we'll just repeat this. Right. So it's all comes down to, are you preparing these kids for the real world? And I think, education has dropped the ball on that in a huge way.
The biggest problem is that most of the people in education don't live in the real world. They don't. I mean, when I say that, I mean, obviously they live in homes and stuff, but they don't. They've not ever worked in it or lived in it in a way that they understand how it functions. So they don't. It's my impression anyway. When all the people I've been around who've spent their lives in academia, most of them don't really even have an appreciation for what they don't know about how the world outside of academia functions, like how food gets on their table, how, unless of course they work in an agricultural college. But if you're working in like a liberal arts college environment, whatever, I don't think most of these, social sciences and professors and people like that, especially in the education schools, the schools where it's like, I'm going back in to teach teachers how to teach. These are not subject matter experts. People don't understand that. They don't understand that the person teaching the teacher how to teach social studies is not a subject matter expert in history. That's not who's doing it. They're not a subject matter expert in English either. These people are not, they're not trying to they're not even an academic in that subject. Like, I would prefer that. I would prefer the person who's passionate about literature, passionate about, reading or something, to be the one that is teaching people how to teach reading. But that's not what it is. They are people who are very attached to pedagogy. And like, when I was in graduate school, the thing that seemed to light the fire in the eyes of my professors was the latest, greatest research study finding about how this newfangled little method not did work, but could work. A lot of it was like, we've done this thing. And if you ask for evidence, well, does it work? Does it work better? And it was like their mark on the world was going to be coming up with a new cool way to teach reading, a new cool way to teach this, like somehow inventing pedagogy or inventing methodology, inventing a new way to teach a lesson was, made them feel all awesome, as opposed to looking at teaching as an interpersonal relationship and craft that, yes, you can hone your own personal technique. It's still a one-on-one. I mean, if you're a teacher going in a classroom with a bunch of students, it's you and those kids. It's a people job. There's not going to be a form or a box or anything to check off or whatever that's going to, even if you're using the science of reading, it's still going to be you with those kids communicating that and picking up on, are they getting it and all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't seem to float their boat as much as finding a new system, a new method, a new formula, a new kit. And I don't know if it's fueled by money. I don't know if it's fueled by lack of self-esteem, that they didn't build anything and make anything out there. So they want to make something new. I don't know what it is, but they're not really all that interested in their subjects. It's weird.
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes down to a lot of, in academics. I mean, this has been a problem when you sit in the academic world. You have to kind of ignore reality in some way, right? You're developing these different systems and different ways to think about things. I mean, this is where you get stuff like socialism, communism. It's just a thought experiment that works really well on paper until you apply it to human beings, and it's a train wreck. At best, it's a train wreck. But what's the saying? Those who can do, and those who can't teach.
Yes.
I think it's kind of a joke, because also the other side of that, those who can do it the best can teach it effectively. Mm-hmm. So, you have those two, I think, extremes. But if people dive right from high school to college and then go right into teaching, I think sometimes that lack of experience makes it much more difficult to translate into the real world to give again these kids that skill set. So the best way to remedy that problem, that's difficult, because obviously we need teachers, we need some form of education, but
somewhere along the way too, we got afraid to tell anyone they're wrong. And by wrong, I don't mean, how do I put this? There are some things that are true, and there are some things that are false, and there are some things that are right, and there are some things that are wrong, and so forth. And somewhere along the way, that became taboo. That, I remember pretty vividly, I think it was right around like 1999, 2000, right around the turn of the century thing. Where I heard a story on the radio, and it was getting a lot of airtime. It might have been in conservative talk radio, about a school district that had banned the use of red pen. It was a big deal. No more red pen. You may not use red pen to correct kids' papers because it was too aggressive. It was harsh. It was mean. It was going to crush their little self-esteem, and they were going to just not be able to learn because you put red pen or pencil or whatever, anything in red. You couldn't do red. And I remember thinking about that and thinking, this is utterly ridiculous. Like, that somebody is even thinking about this or thinks that is what, goes on in a kid's head. Where did they get this information? And that became a big deal. But I think it sort of began around that time, like mid to late 90s, where we stopped saying, not only that's wrong and that's right, but it's okay to be wrong, kid. You're not always going to be right. That's called life, okay? And when you make a mistake in your school years, like grammar mistake or a mistake on a math test or whatever, guess what? Good news. You weren't just plotting the formula to land the rocket. I mean, you're just doing math class. So you have a chance to fix it and learn how to do it better, because hello, that's my job. I'm the teacher to help figure out what is the misunderstanding. Why did you get it wrong? Let's help you fix it. I had an English teacher in high school who used red and was adamant about using red because he said we would see it better. It would just jump out at us. Okay. He would turn back papers and we got 2 grades. You got the grade for the content, what you were saying in your ideas, and you got the grade for the mechanics. And they could be 2 very different grades. He wasn't going to take away from your content if you messed up your commas, but you could increase that grade if you fixed it, because he wanted us to learn. So he would mark it up in red, and he wouldn't tell you like how to fix it. We had a book called the EGC, English Grammar and Composition book. It was a white book, hardcover. And all the rules had like a number and a letter, like a chapter and a letter, whatever. And he would just circle it and put that chapter and letter. And then it was up to you to figure out in the chapter, what did I do wrong? So part of the process was, I have to go look it up. I have to identify what exactly was my mistake. And then if on the reverse side, you fixed it correctly, your grade would go up. And there was all kinds of incentive to do it. And it was brilliant. I learned most of my grammar that way because he marked it wrong, but not like wrong, you're a bad person, wrong, you're stupid. No, it was just, you're learning. You made mistakes. That's what school is for. I was like, to me, it seemed like a perfectly natural thing. Now, they'd never done that for me in public school. This was in private school when I went in 10th grade. But in public school, they never did that. They would like circle stuff and just put wrong and like leave. That was it. Just wrong. But I got a chance to fix it. So we decided at some point that there was no in between. It was like, if you get the X that it's wrong, that's all bad. We got to stop doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to incentives, that's something that a lot of, I would say, educators and people who think on the modern left, I would say, don't really understand. Do they think that we are kind of unbound from the human condition, that they can just build kids like they build computers, right? So it's like, you don't worry about all these different things as long as you repeat what we say. It's the same thing as putting in a computer program where they don't understand the incentives of trying to make yourself better.
Well, that's Marxism, though, in a nutshell. I mean, you really can't be a Marxist if you have a firm grasp on the human condition,
Yeah.
And every Marxist I've ever known is in complete denial about it. It just they will almost go so far as to tell you there's no such thing as human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get some pushback from some people say there's no such thing as human nature and that, we're not like programmed to react a certain way. It's like, that's not what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that because we're human, we're like programmed to be or do certain things. It's just to say that we are predisposed, if you will, or we have tendencies that are innate because we're still animals. I mean, to a certain degree, we're still fairly primitive creatures in the evolution of living things. And we have this amazing mind and we can do so many amazing things with it, but it's because we can train it, we can improve it, we can learn, we can grow, we can develop. But if we don't, we're not just a ventriloquist dummy that's just gonna sit there. We're gonna still do things even if we don't learn. And those things that we're gonna do we're inclined to naturally do them in ways that are sort of antithetical to modern civilization. And I'm not an anthropologist, but I'm, or an evolutionary biologist, but that's my simplistic layman's way of putting it, that, you learn your way and you can do, we build a civilization like this. But if you don't, you don't. And you can go back there for the same reason. It's not stored in your brain tissue, all the collective knowledge from before.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between knowledge and, let's say, brain capacity. So maybe we've evolved and our brain capacity has evolved to be bigger or small. I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing. But that doesn't mean there's facts in there or stuff that we know how to do things. If you stay away from, if you were born in the middle of the woods and raised by wolves, you wouldn't know how to make a fire.
But you'd know to stay away from fire, though.
Yeah, you would.
There are some things that are inherited. And one of my favorite quotes, I think it was Joe Rogan, the much maligned Joe Rogan now, used to ask people, it's like, all right, how long, if I gave you, let's say, a set of matches and a pocket knife and sent you into the wilderness, how long would it take you to build an iPhone? And the point of it is like you don't have all of this inherited knowledge. You have to rely on other people and people of the past to understand, how to build the things now. And I think one of the biggest problems, and what I always call the biggest privilege we have today, is to judge people of the past by the standards we have today. So that's why you get to poo-poo all these people who sometimes believed in really, really awful things and did some awful things to our standards today. And by ignoring those people, by ignoring the accomplishments they had, we start to believe either in our own ego to believe that we're like pure of heart and we're doing it the right way, although we're relying on all the things that came before us. Or we just claim those things that came before us, like math, which happened to, I don't know if a white person invented it, but if it did, then it must be white supremacy, right?
No.
But the whole point is, it's like you can dismiss all of these very, very valuable things as undesirable because someone who touched it at some point was undesirable. It's like that girl, I don't remember, she was on the Kimmy Schmidt show, and she was also on The Office, who had to do that apology because she was at that one dance. She won some award at a dance.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Had a sketchy history or whatever like that. And, she was forced to apologize before it. And I forgot, someone made a really good point. It's like, okay, how many of those people demanding that she apologizes have ever been to a Major League Baseball game? Because they have a pretty shady past with how they treated people, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So at what point do you figure out what you're going to be associated with and have to go far enough back in their history to understand that they may have done awful things?
I just have to throw in on the whole, did you vote for a Democrat this year?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, remember, they flipped. So that's a...
but I thought we go back to infinity as far as like the past. Mm-hmm. There's no line, if we're going back to 1619, I'm pretty sure we can go back to Jim Crow and who got their fingers dirty on that one. Yeah. I mean, no, the hypocrisy is baked into the formula. So, I mean, I just think what I would like to see, I'm kind of somewhat changing the subject, I guess, but I would really like to see more people challenging the premises behind all of this. Okay, so we're getting in the weeds here. We're talking about this and that, math and right answers and red pen, but there seem to be a new set of premises surrounding education, and I want to articulate them because I think it's important for people to hear them out loud and then question them often. Okay. And the first one is that education is about something to do with the group, with society. This can go back to Dewey, and there's a fair amount of, he's to blame for a lot of it. But that when you send your child to school, the premise is we are educating your child to be part of the group, part of a group, not for his or her own benefit. Okay. I don't know if many parents really think of it that way. They'll say, well, I think it's important to have an educated population that's good for society as a whole. I mean, most of us would agree with that. It's good that, we're educated citizenry. We know how to read so we can vote responsibly and behave responsibly and get employment and all that. But that's very different from saying to contribute to the group, to the collective. Okay. Mm. So the premise is now a public education that not your individual child is entitled to an education, but that the society is entitled to your child. Educated by these people, these experts, with the correct ideas and the correct values so that they can contribute in the correct way. And it's very important for us to articulate this and say this out loud and make sure that parents are on board with that. Are you on board with the premise that the school's job is to take your precious little baby at the age of whatever they want to start at 3, heaven forbid, but 7, let's say 6 or 7. And thank you for your birthing process. Thank you, birthing person.
You birthing people,
yeah. You birthing people have birthed the children, the clay, the raw material, and we'll take it from here. And now we're going to mold and shape them into the proper kind of little person. Now, that's premise number 1, that they are now assuming a shaping parental type role.
And just so you know, child. You just described what China does.
Oh,
that is literally what China does.
I am well aware of it. Yeah. Yes. So we do that. And meanwhile, we'll still use words like individual, blah, blah, blah. We don't mean any of it. So we this is the premise of school, that your child belongs to the collective. Okay. Second premise, I think I hinted at it just now, that teachers, educators, academia, all this have all the knowledge that needs to be known about educating your child, not you. No. You in fact, you're suspicious. You're probably going to mess it up. You don't have, because we don't know exactly what you're going to do is bad, but we do. We know exactly what needs to be done for each and every child at all times. Trust us. We'll take care. Don't look at those test scores. Don't look at the results. We know, we're the experts. It's kind of like, take this medicine. We're the experts. They assume that they know so much more about, first of all, educating all children, but yours in particular. Yeah. Nobody knows more than they do about educating children, even yours. So that's why you get parents going into IEP meetings and they get treated like dirt, even though they live and breathe this child's needs like every single day. Shut up and listen. Okay. That's not to say there aren't some people that listen, but the overall premise is we're the experts and you're not. Right. Yeah. And then now we have moved on. Now we've moved that those have been the premises probably for going on 30, 40 years. But now we've moved on to a new set, which is that the purpose of school is not just to train your child for the collective, but to right the wrongs of the past. That your child is going to change the world, and because the world sucks. And so we're going to take these little kids and we're going to make ourselves a little army of activists. And that is the purpose. It is the appropriate purpose of school. They're not even secretive about it. It is the appropriate purpose of school to train future social change makers, activists. They could put all kinds of new fancy words on it, but activists. That is actually more important than any specific knowledge set that they could get out of this experience, whether it's math facts or history or, vocabulary. No, none of that is as important as the highest goal, which is training these citizens, active citizens, for trained and ready for civic engagement is how they put it. So this is a new premise that I'm not sure parents are really dialed in on. Is that why you send your children to school? Do you believe that it is your child's obligation to change society and fix the wrongs of the past? As if the past is immutable. It's in the past. We can't fix it. So is that what you want, parents? Because if not, this is the premise they're operating under. And the last one, of course, is that the schools, academia, know what society needs to be changed to. They're not going to tell you because they actually don't really know. They imply they know by virtue of the changes they want to make. So they're saying all of this is bad and we need to get rid of it all. And if you say, to what? Yeah, but all of this is bad. Did you not hear us? This is bad. We need to right the wrongs. It's wrong. It's racist. It's terrible. We need to get rid of it. And you're like, okay, well, let's say you were right. I mean, for the sake of discussion, to what though? Like, what are you planning to do? To be not that. Yeah, I got that. Picked up on that. Thanks. I understand English. I went to school before now. So these are the questions. I mean, these are the premises I want parents to question. I want them to stop thinking about in here and get up here and start saying, do I really, is that what school is for? Is that when I sent my precious baby off to school? Is that what I was expecting? Or did I think they were going to learn to read, write, and do arithmetic and think and like know how to think about stuff and figure out things for themselves and not be a 17-year-old kid sitting there going, well, nobody told me how, and I have no idea. You didn't tell me, and you didn't show me, and that's boring. And I don't know. I don't want to do it because it's hard.
Yeah, or even worse, standing outside of their school with a sign saying, give me healthcare or something like that, being more entitled to something
just
rather
give
than
me
figuring out how
stuff.
to
I mean,
get it.
not really sure who all the people are who are going to make all those things that you want to be given anymore, but they don't know that because they were never taught any of that. They have had no context for anything. I really can't overstate this. You're ending up with people graduating high school who have, as smart as they are in certain ways, like they can figure out how to use this in like 5 minutes. They can figure out how to do this text, apps, download an app, do all kinds of stuff. They can do all kinds of cool stuff with that. But if this ever goes away, they are absolutely helpless. They don't know how to boil water. They don't know how to plant something. They don't know how to fix anything. I mean, and I'm obviously not speaking of every single solitary child. Okay. I'm talking about what the school itself is offering in the way of opportunities for skill building, knowledge, acquisition and understanding and application is a small fraction of what you and I had. Certainly what I had. I mean, I went to elementary school in the 70s and my goodness, we had cooking and shop and we had sewing class and we had typing class and we had, on top of history, it was actually called history. And then they changed it to social studies when I was in like middle school. And then we had, we just had the classes and the people teaching the classes appeared to be anyway, people actually really cared a lot about that thing, and now this doesn't even seem to be what the class is about. My kids were in classes. It was like, what's your class called? Quest. What's Quest about? Well, it's like maybe a little science and maybe a little STEM and maybe a little this, maybe a little that. I'm like, what are you learning? Food deserts. We're learning about food deserts. Do you know where food comes from? No.
Yeah, I think, you hit on a lot of things there. And, when it comes to viewing the parent, I think an important thing to understand is something you hit on, the educator's view of the parents. Their goal is to program your children. And sometimes the parents, if you are not completely in lockstep with what they're doing, are seen as noise in the system that they have to take out. So, just noticing that very, very simple observation should really throw up some red flags to a lot of parents out there. And when you hit on the preparing the kid to contribute to society, that always seems like a worthwhile goal, right? You do want to contribute to society, but before you do that, before you worry about the collective, you have to develop yourself as an individual first, right? There's an order of operations here that people need to understand. This goes along the lines of, Jordan Peterson's got to clean your room before you criticize the world. You can't expect to change society, especially change it for the good, if you don't even have your own life in order. If you don't have your own set of values and your own moral code to stand behind, rather than kind of sitting behind the collective and kind of blindly trusting the people in power being like, all right, they know what they're doing, and I'm just going to be an activist for them. And that's a lot of times what you're developing in these kids. And that's when, especially when they're indoctrinated like this up through high school. And then at high school, that's when you start to really branch out and be socially active. And they throw all that energy into doing this stuff and just kind of repeating that cycle. That makes it super difficult for any kids, around them who are trying to get out of the system or trying to, again, develop their own sense of individuality. It's a hard trap to get out of.
I would take it even further that I actually believe that if we impressed upon kids that they, you kind of come into this world alone and you leave it alone, and we hope you don't live it alone. I mean, like for you, if you don't want to, but the point is,
should be the part where you make
friends. We're social creatures. So yes, right. But your social interactions, the society you exist in really should be the one of your choice, in terms of the micro and as far as the macro goes. I think if each individual is building a life that they can be proud of, okay, the larger society will be just fine. I really, truly believe that. I think if you gave zero thought to like, how is this impacting the world? As long as what you were doing was, to truly take care of yourself that in a way that did not infringe on anybody else. Okay, so you're not hurting anyone, you're not taking anybody else's stuff, you're not trespassing on their rights or their property or anything like that. It's you're just kind of taking care of your own in a good way, in a truly virtuous way, and that what you put back out or what you contribute or what you want to do in the world that impacts others is by choice, voluntary, and is well received. It's not just your volition, but the other person is like wants it or needs it. There's an exchange there. It doesn't have to be for money. It's just that there's this give and this take. And I think if every person is operating like that in society and not making demands and you are obliged to me and give me that and that's mine and I'm jealous and that and all these negatives, I think society would be just fine. It would kind of take care of itself. Like, this is mine, that's yours. Okay, yeah. I end here, you begin there. But we don't do that. We're teaching children, they have these entitlements and obligations. And we start real young defining what those are. And they're wrong. They're all wrong. And I don't see how we end up with a society that is anything other than, if we keep going down this path, we're going to end up with something that is like Lord of the Flies-esque. Because if you tell a young child, because of your skin color, you're obliged. You didn't have any say in it, but you're obliged. You have this original sin of your skin color. Okay. And then you tell the other kid, well, because of his original sin, you're entitled. And we keep playing, we keep in different ways, using different vocabulary. We keep trading back and forth with this sort of like entitlement obligation Olympics. Some people call it identity Olympics. I just call it entitlement obligation Olympics. Who's obliged and entitled to what and whom at any given interaction.
Entitlement and privilege for sure. I think those two.
Yeah, those are the words they use, but I call it obligation because when you say you have privilege, the underlying message is you're obliged. Noblesse oblige, right? So there doesn't even have to be noblesse. You could be white living in a cardboard box under the highway and you're somehow obliged because you have privilege or whatever. But that's a powerful message to give to young children. That's a very, very powerful message and a really bad one because when you feel obliged inappropriately, resentment builds. Lots of resentment. When you feel entitled inappropriately, all kinds of other negative things. Resentment if you don't get what you feel entitled to. You can start to feel really super lazy. Like, why do I want to do anything? Laziness is going to come over here too. Not just laziness, but cynicism and a kind of like, I'm going to like do things just for me and I'm going to hide it and do, because I don't really owe you. It's just a really negative way to set up a country, and it's certainly not helping the individual do any better. I mean, I think ironically, the people who are taught that they're obliged are going to come out better in the end because unless they really are like self-sacrifice, like, oh, I'm so whatever. If they're codependent, they're screwed. But if they have any self-esteem at all, if their parents manage to impart any kind of self-esteem to them and they're told they're obliged, they can reject that. They'll just be like, whatever. They just won't do it. They'll find some way to work around the system under the table here and around whatever, but they'll just, But if you tell somebody they're entitled and they internalize that and they believe that, I don't have to do anything. I have to learn. I don't have to know skills. I don't have to do it. I'm going to wait for the stuff to just kind of come. And then when it doesn't come and the other people go, screw you. You're not, that was false what they told you.
Yeah, I think the people certainly who are accused of being the privileged at least have the opportunity to be humble, so there are certainly some positive things they can do. I think the full-on self-sacrifice, whipping my back bloody is not a desirable outcome for anyone. But the flip side of that is people taking pride in their ascendancy on the oppression hierarchy, if you will. Yeah. Like there's a massive disproportionate feeling between those with that sense of pride from being an oppressed class compared to those who are seen as privileged. And talk about pride. I mean, you talk about this whole month is dedicated to that, and I think that is. I mean, that's something that I thought we were going to start the conversation on. So technically, this first hour was just the intro to our conversation. No, I loved what we've talked about so far, and it was super good. But I do kind of want to pick your brain on I don't want to make this about Pride Month. I have my own views, coming from a practicing Catholic. I'm not a good Catholic, but I'm trying to get better every day.
Right.
So, my views on homosexuality and stuff like that, I have friends who are gay. I know that's always the cop out, but like, that doesn't bother me, but pride does bother me. Like, I think that's something that is not desirable in the community. That's the reason why it's one of the 7 deadly sins. And with that is this sense of entitlement of not only educators feeling that they must step in as the parental figure in your kids' lives, but now we're starting to see corporations try to do the same thing, or trying to play their part. And the incentives behind that is not the same as being a teacher having that power complex, but it's sometimes, I think, them trying to make sure they stay out of the spotlight of the outrage mob. But when it comes to Pride Month, there's a certain point at which you don't teach your kids about sexuality and sexual orientation because they're just too young to understand that. They got to understand other things to build the competency to understand that. But there's been recent examples of, take like Blue's Clues, for example. They did a whole thing where they had an animated drag queen singing about different types of families. There's a certain point where that's probably not appropriate anymore. I mean, we can go into the origins of drag queens. To me, a drag queen is overtly sexual. It's a man trying to accentuate the sexual features of a woman. Therefore, it's sexual. I know there's other reasons they do it, and I'm not trying to just poo-poo on drag queens, but there's a certain point at which this is probably not, or should not be, desirable by the society as a whole. And I'm just wondering, your take as being a previous educator, or an ex-educator, however you want to label yourself there. Like, how do you see, this type of Pride Month indoctrination and exposing these kids to something they probably shouldn't learn about until, a more advanced age? Like, how do you see this playing out?
I kind of go back to, one of those premises I said, where the school feels like it's their job to impart all the values and all the, sort of all the things that your child should think about the world and all the people in it, that's their role to play, and that they know what the one right way to do that is. I think it's incredible hubris that they do that. I think it's intrusive. And as a parent, I resent the living hell out of it. I mean, that is my job, especially with very young children. I get to decide when my child is, or I and my child, because I think kids start asking questions, and that's an interaction. But your child will begin to let you know when they have questions, and you can address them as you see fit. But it's for you to do, and that's that intimate relationship where you can feel out, because they are your child. You can feel out how far you can go. I use the example of, I asked my parents. My youngest brother was 18 years younger. So I had this strange, pseudo parental relationship. But I remember when he was like 3 and I heard some like giggling coming from my parents' room, and I saw my brother go back up the stairs, and I went and said, what's going on? And they said I was home from college or something. They said, well, he just came down and asked us where babies come from. So I said, okay, how do you guys do that? Like, I'm 21 years old. Like, wow, why do you do that? And they said, well, we just answered his question with the simplest answer we could give to as far as he would go and accept it. Right. So I said, what'd you say? They said, mommies and daddies. Mommies and daddies make the baby. And he was satisfied with that. He was 3. So he's like, oh, so mommies and daddies make the babies. Together. We do it together. Okay. And he went back upstairs. Now, it wasn't all that long, a few more months. He came back but how exactly, how did they do it? Right. And then they went a little farther, but still not that much farther. They said like plants a seed or something, very basic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's satisfying for like a good 2 years. Okay. So like they got to plant a seed and then 2 more years went by. So I'm not going to go through the whole story, but the point of it is that parents ought to be the judge of like how much, how little, when, what, about, and it doesn't have to be sexual. Okay. So sometimes they're more interested in knowing their origin story, like where did I come from? And they don't really start asking the sexual stuff more until they're quite a bit of like tween years. And to a certain extent, they think it's icky. They're like, I my last teenager just turned to a teenager and she's still like, I don't want to see
it. Fun conversation with your parents.
Right? Yeah. It's like, ew. Like they know stuff, but they're just like, they don't really want to talk about it. Right. And they don't want to see it. They don't want to see it in movies. They just don't want to at that age. And that we're not talking littles. We're talking, 10, 11, 12. They're just like, ugh, do they have to? So when I see things like Blue's Clues, and they're talking about different kinds of families, here's the problem with it. I don't get the impression that they're doing it so that kids will be understanding of other kids who have different families. First of all, I don't see that that's a driving need. In other words, we have teeny tiny percentages of families that are that esoteric. I mean, some of the ones in that Blue's Clues show were like, really out there combinations. Yeah. Not even just 2 mommies and 2 daddies. It was pretty out there.
Yeah, some pansexual.
Yeah, there was some stuff that I don't even know a kid would even know to notice that if it's not visible to the naked eye. There's a bunch of 2 daddies and 2 mommies. So like why you think you need to show this to preschoolers is beyond me, but whatever. It's terminology now that they're not going to understand, that half the parents can't even explain to them. And so they put that out there to address. It's like one of those, a solution in search of a problem. I don't see that that's a big problem. I don't think little kids are going, you have a weird family,
Mm-hmm.
And oh my God, I'm frozen again. Is it working? Okay.
You're good now.
If your goal is just understanding and being kind, which really, that's what they claim, then you talk about being kind to people. You don't show all the examples of where you need to be kind. You just generically talk about it. If people are different from you and live different ways from you, you still have to be kind to them and you still have to be respectful of them. And we treat people with decency and dignity and like foundational values, okay, principles. But they seem to be doing something different. And what I see is what they're doing is saying they're normalizing something. They're not saying this is included also. It's more like, this is extra cool. That's what it seems like to me. This is extra cool and awesome and interesting and different and colorful and amazing and all kinds of things. All these other choices, like as opposed to this occurred and this was their natural, like this is how people live and you just need to be kind to people. It feels a lot more like, and there's this and that, and choose this, choose that. And the one thing you really don't see a lot of inclusion of is a regular family, a regular nuclear family, mom and dad.
The nuclear family.
So sure. It starts to feel after a while like all of this is cool, but that's less cool.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel like what they claim it is, and what they claim it is, it isn't. So my take on it is it's inappropriate. It's a violation of the children's innocence to slip it into a Blue's Clues show, which kids sit and watch, parents go, hey, watch Blue's Clues. I mean, that was an ambush.
Yeah.
That's not what anyone who thinks otherwise. I mean, that's not what Blue's Clues is ever about. And the parents now are in the position of having to explain to their children either why they can't watch it if they heard about it beforehand. Now it's like, what do I say why you can't watch this episode? Or now the kid's gonna hear it from their other friends, and it's just not. It's very obviously intended to get between the parents and their kids. And then people say, well, then don't let your kids watch it. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's not that easy.
That is an impossible task to screen every kid's show. I mean, as much as I enjoy
It's just,
watching children's shows,
yeah,
it's
cool.
impossible. It's an impossible task.
I did want to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, a real quick thing before you get to the question. I think, you as a parent need to take the responsibility of making sure that you are not just sitting your kids in front of a TV and just letting them watch a bunch of shows, even if you watch those shows when you were a kid. But it also is your responsibility to, and this is the hard part, because I went to Catholic school, so I never got the birds and the bees talk ever. Like I went to private Catholic school until I went to high school, a public high school, and that was a major culture shock. And the worst thing you can do as a parent, especially now, is push that responsibility off to the school and say, all right, you teach my kids this stuff. It's too uncomfortable to have that conversation for me. No. And that is the worst option to go with.
No, not cool. Not cool. Yeah. All right. So I do want to address this from Kimberly Barnett. Thank you very much for the super chat. Deb and Kevin, can you give your takes on Common Core? I really believe it opened up the door to allow this crazy ideology. Well, I'll go first. I agree with you with the possible exception of that it opened the door. I think the door was open and it just walked on in. The groundwork for Common Core was laid with No Child Left Behind. The concept of a national curriculum at all was actually even before No Child Left Behind. There was one before that, but No Child Left Behind was really one of the most prominent. Okay. And it set the standard that it was the school's job to, quote, leave no child behind. In other words, that we needed, it sort of implied an equity of a certain level of outcome. So now failure becomes not an option. So that, to me, opened the door for something called Common Core. So if all the children in the nation have to be moving along and advancing, now we have social promotion and things like that. No more failing kids, whatever. No child left behind. Well, gosh, we better have a common curriculum or a common framework for doing that, or else how are we going to standardize all this not left behindness? So I think the door was open and it came through. Now, Common Core, though, to your point, Kimberly, you're absolutely correct that it laid the groundwork or opened the door for this specific ideology, in the sense that a lot of us, if you go watch Lily Tang Williams' channel, she has something from 10 years ago. She has a video from 10 years ago about it. And some people call it Commie Core because of not because of just what she said, but other people have called it that because it reminded her so much of things from China. And she remembered. And so you're absolutely right. That was sort of its first iteration, the first brand name, if you will, of curriculum that did a couple of things that were very important. It removed literature as the foundation of ELA, of English Language Arts, and it removed chronological history as the foundation of social studies. And in those two things, you can see how it would be much easier to move into some of the junk that they're teaching now, where we're going to talk about racism endlessly, or we're going to talk about, other stuff. When you teach informational texts, for example, if you get rid of literature or you do very little of it, you remove a really important opportunity for critical thinking, for a child to visualize him or herself in different environments and in different relationships and situations where with other kinds of people, where you have to imagine, you have to use your imagination of like, oh God, how would I solve that problem? What would I do, etc. And so when that happens, if you're just responding to informational text, it's more about when, what, where, repeating back facts. You're disconnected as an individual from the material. it's, you're not really, you might ask for your opinion on it. And in fact, they did a lot of that. Like, what's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on that? But you can't really visualize yourself in the story or in the information. It's not, you're reading about clean water in some pond somewhere is not really going to get you to think critically about in a human way. They might ask you to think critically about some policy, but it's also how they got to talking about politics so much. If we focus on informational text, we can cover politics in English class. We don't have to worry about literature. We'll be covering politics in English class. Parents will never know. We do social studies and we remove chronological history. We can spend as much time as we want on the specific parts of history we feel like covering, and we can leave other stuff out because we're just not going through and covering it in order. And if we don't use textbooks that come home with the child, if everything's on a computer, Chromebook, or printed forms that you get that day, and then you fill it out and leave it at school, and less of it's coming home, we have less transparency for the parents. This is all by design.
Trail.
There's no paper trail. It's all by design. Common Core, the brainchild of Barack Obama, who's the offspring, the philosophical offspring of a bunch of Marxists. This was his baby, and critical race theory just fits neatly into his baby. So that's my take. I hope I answered your question. What was your take on it, Kevin?
Yeah, so I know a lot less about Common Core, but I do understand the phrase of "no child left behind." It's one of those phrases that is a clear, admirable cause that ends up in a complete mess.
Yeah.
To quote a little bit from Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, which I swear it's the last time we'll bring this up. People who advocate for stuff like this, they will eventually find out that there are some very unpleasant consequences which will follow most of those advocates of these policies do not want. Oh, sorry, I messed that up. My OCD is going off. But
right.
But yeah, it's something that's going to end up in a very undesirable consequence for the people who desire a different outcome there. So, any time that someone comes up to you with a nice and neatly labeled program or idea, just understand that, not all these admirable causes are going to end up the way they want it to. They're not going to end up the way that they're planned. So,
and again, I'm so sensitive to word choice. It's just my particular, I don't know what it is, like hypersensitivity, OCD, whatever it is. But I get real caught up in the words that people use to name things and what the underlying meanings are. And as I said before, when you call something "no child left behind," well, let's look at the word "left." Left by whom? Left by the schools. Well, then that means the premise is that the school's job is to take them somewhere. Left behind. Okay, take them where? I mean, and why is it inherently a good thing? Why is it taboo to ask if it's always a net good to bring everybody to the same destination, graduation, let's say? Why is that a net good? I mean, if we say no child left behind, like not even one, not even the one who didn't do his homework, not even the one that is violent in the classroom, not even the one who is whatever, like needs a lot of extra help and should be in a different class. I mean, there's so many ways to look at that. And then when you look at the outcome, things that we have seen since then, and that's why I go back to No Child Left Behind. We have seen the elimination of expulsion. We have seen lenient disciplinary policies. We have seen the social promotion of kids who otherwise would have been, quote, left back. But being left back wasn't always a bad thing. Sometimes, whether for maturity reasons or just getting a grip on the material, you needed it. Now we can't do that at all. It's not even an option. You saw the elimination of different kinds of, we now can't have advanced things because not enough people can get into advanced. So we're now leaving them behind, even if they're still in the school, in a regular class because they can't be in an advanced class. And all kinds of, it carries meaning into everything else that we do. That's why I think we need as parents to think very carefully about about the schools, and when they say, oh, we have this new program and it's this, spend some time with the words. really make sure you get them to define those terms. When they say things like, this is our diversity, equity, inclusion program, have you even thought about whether those things can exist in the same place at the same time? Can you? It's a paradox. You can't have equity and inclusion and diversity of thought, certainly. No, you can't. Equity negates those two.
Yeah, and the problem is when they throw equity in there, it changes from, I mean, it will still allow no child left behind, but it also means no child allowed in front.
Correct.
Kids who are able to advance themselves more quickly are now held back because that applies as standard.
Right. Because, what left behind is behind the person who would otherwise be up front. It's not just, failed out of the school, didn't graduate. No, I don't even think that's what they meant in the first place. They really had this notion, not all of them, but some of them, I think, actually believed that kids are just, not just tabula rasa, but tabula rasa that you can write whatever you want in there and it will be just as good. Like every kid will be just as good. They completely deny the reality of human beings. They deny that there's such a thing as IQ. They deny that we're born with different levels of it. They deny that there's a limit to how much you can improve it. You can improve it a little bit. You can also make it worse. But it is a thing. It's real. And to pretend it isn't and it doesn't exist is just to deny science. It's to deny reality. They're like, well, follow the science, except they don't follow the science of reading. They don't follow the science of intelligence. Not that it's perfect.
They pick and choose when to apply that phrase.
Right.
Sure.
And IQ is not a perfect science. There's a lot of flaws to it. I certainly wouldn't live by it, but it's a thing. Not everyone is equally capable intellectually of mastering all things. Some people are going to be brilliant at one thing and not so great at another. I mean, this is what makes a world. This is why we have nice things. But if you say that nobody can be, it is Harrison Bergeron. This is exactly what it is. And that's the only way you can achieve equity. It's the only way you can do it. You can only hold people back. You can't magically propel people, even just by passing them and sticking them in the next grade. Eventually, the people I really feel bad for are the ones who were socially promoted to graduate high school. They then get affirmative action to go to college. They go to college, and either if the college is honest, they give them honest grades and they don't do very well. Or worse, they socially promote them through that. Okay. And then whatever next hurdle whatever they hit the wall of credentialing where they go, I'm sorry, no. Like, we got to draw the line somewhere. It's crushing. It's crushing. Like, what job are they going to have? What are they going to do? And now if they didn't get full scholarships, they have a mountain of debt. You know what I'm saying? So I just feel like it's such a fall. And I froze again. Am I there?
Yeah,
is it working?
You're a little choppy, but I think you're doing better now.
Keep Something going. Is I'm going to have a little chat with my internet provider. Either that or I just got to close out a couple things. I had a window open. I closed it. So that's what I think about that. But we're coming up on almost an hour and a half. And what else did we not get to? I feel like there was something else you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, the only launching point I really had here was to go through,
did you want to talk about any of the other stuff that they're doing with the Pride thing and the kids and like the specific exposures?
Is there more stuff they did?
Oh, well, there were a lot of videos floating around with people talking about taking their children to the parades. And therefore exposing them to things that were going on there, like demonstrations of kink and things like that. And there were people who were highly critical of it. And then there were people doing videos defending it, saying how it was perfectly appropriate.
Those videos that, years ago that it came out that some kid was dancing on a stripper stage in a gay club or something like that. And I mean, that's extremely unfortunate on two levels. One, it's unfortunate for the kid because they're being exposed to extremely damaging things. And two, it's unfortunate for, the gay community, which has had that stigma of being more predatory, which is unearned in most cases. And it's unfortunate that they're going to be painted with that same broad brush. Right. But this sexualizing of children is something that is just extraordinarily disturbing. I mean, I understand the want of not trying to ostracize a child that has same-sex parents or something like that, right? Because I've had I live in a very, very progressive place, so I've had to have a conversation with my 8 and 9 year old about a man can love a man and a woman can love a woman, but it ends there. I don't talk about what they do in the bedroom. I don't talk about any sort of I certainly don't talk about them gyrating on a float at some parade.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the worst thing to tell them. And it's just understanding when kids are capable of even processing stuff like this. Like there are steps that they need to take before going full in to all these explicit activities. So,
well, I tend to, even though I'm a fairly live and let live kind of person when it comes to consenting adults. I take it's none of my business what you do in private approach. And I certainly don't want the government getting involved in it, but I am a very different person when it comes to children. When it comes to children, I will go out on a limb and tell you that I think they are literally recruiting. Like I actually believe that there are people who are trying to turn children, like trying to get more children to be like them, and to think that this is just another, viable option for them to choose, and not just another one, but a cooler one, a neater one, a more unique and awesome one where you can derive like all kinds of social status and, virtue points from being like this. And I think it's causing a lot of problems for children. In particular, the trans stuff. I really believe that is damaging a lot of children, girls in particular, but children, period. And I think when the schools engage in it, I hate that companies are doing it, but when schools do it, I really think it's grooming. I mean, to ask young children about their gender, expression when they're very young, and to say, well, you were assigned this gender at birth, is putting, again, a wedge between them and their parent. Now you've got a kid that comes home at the age of 7 or 8 and says, Mom, am I really a girl? Like, did you just assign this to me? Like, is this even true? Like the teacher said. And again, another conversation that you shouldn't have to be having, because it's an outrageous thing for anybody that is, I wouldn't want a parent really like having like, but it's their business, but it's definitely not the school's business. It's so messed up. I don't know. I'm more conservative on that side. I think it's abusive.
Yeah. Oh, no. I'm 100% agreeing with you there. I always try to look at things in the most positive light, or at least attribute good, well-intentioned motive on the people who are doing it. But this is one that's nearly impossible. The problem with Pride Month is it's the pride of the people and the ego of the people who are kind of flaunting this stuff. They care much more about their own either woke points or their own image than they care about serving the kids or serving the people they pretend to serve. Because I know just about all of the people who'd fit in that LGBTQ alphabet people label absolutely hate those people. Like they're like, I'm not them. And that's the same thing with most genuine trans people are like, I'm not them. I don't associate with them. I'm my own individual. I don't need to be labeled by this group here.
I do want to clarify, the Common Core is not a curriculum, it's a set of standards. However, the curriculum developers, the people who make learning materials, as they're called, have made giant repositories of learning materials suitable for the Common Core. And so teachers in places where they use the Common Core and even places where they don't, in other words, even the states that said, we're not going to follow the Common Core standards, as long as the learning material could fit somehow with their state standards, they would use these mass-produced Common Core learning materials. And I've seen them, and they're garbage. And so I say, when I say curriculum, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about something that came in a box and it's a national curriculum, but they had a set of standards that then the curriculum developers ran off and made a bunch of printouts and documents and books and things that were suitable for the Common Core. They used them all over the country, and they're absolute trash. They're just horrible. And if you get lazy teachers, and there are a lot of those out there, they just go online and go, yeah, they just sort of look up in the index. That'll do. So much for scope and sequence, whatever. Yeah, something in that sequence, that'll do. And they're organized that way. They're organized by like the subject and what's teaching, and they don't put a whole lot of thought into it. They just, this is suitable. It becomes like a Chinese, restaurant menu of learning materials. So that's what I meant when I said curriculum. So just to clarify that. Anyway, so did I answer the pride thing and all that adequately?
Yeah. Like I said, I just want to get stuck on pride. I find a whole bunch of different reasons why we ought not to have. I mean, I understand Black History Month because there's a long history of suffering that is nice for us to at least recognize and see how the generation of people have progressed. But pride is one that I don't get why. I mean, I get the persecution in the past, and again, I'm trying to be as generous as I can to this. But I
just wish Black history was just like, I guess I wish that we didn't do just a month. I wish it was part of history, so when you're teaching history and you're going through a time period, you give weight to those people who made significant contributions. And at every period of history that you're going to read, you will find African Americans and lots of other people who made significant contributions. So I don't have a problem actually at all. In fact, I would prefer it if they would make that effort to say, let's make sure that when we teach chronological history but I still draw the line that it should be significant. The contribution should be comparable. It's not just, let's just go find somebody on a rock who did something that decade. There should be, and there are people. And what I've noticed is that they'll go, because they're more intent on finding the person who shared their politics, they pick some pretty random person who didn't really contribute a whole lot, but they had the right politics, And that's why we don't we don't really talk about Frederick Douglass, because that would be problematic. He doesn't really suit the narrative, So, and then we cram it all into a month, and then they said, we ran out of time. Well, no, you didn't. There was plenty of time. You just needed it to suit the politics.
Or the complaint that it's always, because Black History Month has always been February, as far as I can remember, although it feels like it is every other month. They complain that that's the shortest month, and that's a symptom of white supremacy that they gave them the shortest month or something like that.
Well, and I mean, here's a good example of where it goes off the rails. Is some progressive blue checker person posted on Twitter the other day that they were criticizing, I don't know if it was King Randall or somebody, because he posted a picture of, I don't know if it was his dad or somebody wearing a cowboy hat. And he's like, why would he wear a cowboy hat? And it's a symbol of whites. And I was so pleased. In fact, I shared it as like a thread of awesomeness that people were coming in left and right with all the history of the Black cowboys, that actually Black cowboys predated white cowboys. And they were just like books, titles, and all kinds of information. And it made me so happy. I was like, oh, yay. There are some people out there who know history. But that's a classic example of a person who was taught poorly, a white person. Taught poorly is like, oh, well, this is a cowboy hat is about white people. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Mostly so that's about Americans, yeah.
Right. That's something that could have been included in history of the, the expansion of the West and even Mexico. And, because there's a story, and it's not just a story, it's a cool story. It's like a really fun, cool story that kids can learn from. So that's an example. And then Truman mentioned, even in the comments, he said, we don't learn anything about that Reconstruction period or the post-Reconstruction
but we do
period.
When it comes to the problem is when we think about Black history, they bring up stuff like the Tulsa Massacre as one of the main thing we should all take away from Black history. It's always negative. It's never positive. They never talk about the success stories. They only want to talk about the oppression, because
they got to keep that alive. That's where they derive their power, right? And Truman says, I honestly think, remember we mentioned this before, I think you might have missed it, Truman. I honestly think it's intentional because it's just decades of Democrats disenfranchising and oppressing Blacks. And I made the comment earlier, I said, yes, they've Democrat-washed history. They didn't whitewash history, they Democrat-washed it. So, it certainly sanitized that party as the party of helpers. And even to the extent that they have made classic racist Lyndon Johnson some kind of great savior of the Black community, it makes me want to vomit.
Yeah, really don't quote him on anything if you want to believe in that narrative.
Yeah, I mean, that's we could do a whole show just on like everything Thomas Sowell and Shelby Steele have ever said about their contributions to the Great Society, which drives me absolutely batty. It really does. And you've seen the videos of Thomas Sowell, right? Where he's sitting there and some progressive white lady with this very deep voice, and she's like lecturing him, like talking down to him, like, well, you just don't understand. And he's like, yeah, I'm not Black or anything. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. But anyway.
There's a reason that the Democrats' mascot's a jackass. But
although, I can't disagree with Carlin lately. Those Republicans lately. They're just I don't see.
If you want to hear conservative criticize Republicans, you might want to follow me. I'm actually writing a piece now called "The Castrated Conservative," which is what I'm relabeling. I used to call basically the Never Trump conservatives the Lincoln Project conservatives, but now I think it's a bit too harsh. I don't think all of them are closeted homosexual pedophiles, so I don't want to paint them all with that broad brush. But yes, there's definitely a bravery deficiency inside of the GOP that needs to be addressed.
Well, and I've heard
I don't agree with Carlin and everything, but this is something that I'm also pretty firmly behind.
Well, I mean, just even in terms of just helping out Gabrielle, it's like ridiculous. This could be a landmark case that right up there with Brown v. Board, but they're just dropping the ball on it. As far as as far as defenses I've heard, the only one that carries any weight with me is, well, you don't necessarily know what they're doing or saying because the other side controls the media, controls the press, and they'll just drown it out. And while that is true, okay, so I'll say, yes, you're correct. That is true. We probably heard Dan Crenshaw on his podcast talking about, we denounced that, and all my colleagues denounced it. I'm like, when? Where? I'm sorry. Did I miss it? Okay. And I even follow them on Twitter, and I'm like, hello. So my argument back is, you guys have known since at least George Bush, that the media hates your guts. Like, you've had a long time to figure out a solution other than Rush Limbaugh. Like, I mean, other than Fox, like that you had a little more coverage than one network. All right. Or that why wasn't anybody looking to buy CNN or take it over? I mean, some of these networks were struggling when before Trump was won. Some of these publications, some of these networks were like hanging on for dear life. Why didn't somebody come in and scoop it up and say, not to make it conservative necessarily, but to just, not make it a literal mouthpiece for one party? Why not? Like, I just feel like they are so inept, absolutely clueless when it comes to getting their message out. It is abysmal. And that's been my complaint for decades. I mean, if you have to wait for a great communicator like Ronald Reagan, who's just so electric, or you have to wait for a showman like Donald Trump who gets on TV just because he's like, what's he going to do now? You're doomed.
Who's he going to call a dog today?
Look, the other side does not have charisma. The other side does not have great speakers. The other side doesn't have anything even close and hasn't for a very long time. People talk about Bill Clinton. Oh, what a great speaker. I'm like, what? Barack Obama. Oh, what a great speaker. I'm like, no. No. He had like a couple of decent speechwriters, but no. I'm sorry.
When
He
he
was
was on
not.
script, he was a fluent
He
and
was
good. But when he
smooth.
was off script, he was a
He
battle of
was
the
like,
idiot.
and
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
was insufferable to listen to.
and the people now, I mean,
Kamala Harris, come on, she's pretty good, right?
and Joe Biden's like, forget gaffes. He's like, he says things that like no one should say at all. They're not gaffes. They're like, put him away. But that it, we can't sit around and wait for like Mr. Showman charisma to come along. We have people already. I say we, I'm not even Republican, but people who aren't them, okay, the wrecking the country people. There are people who are articulate, well-spoken speakers. Lots of them. I could rattle off a bunch of names. Like, hello, guys. Could you put them out front more and get like them in front of cameras of speaking and like whatever videos, social media, do something, figure it out, make a plan. You've had plenty of time. And they just are like, they're relying on these old methods of getting the message out and forget about it. It's not going to work.
Ron DeSantis is good. But the interesting thing I've picked up on him is his evolution in speaking he's been in the spotlight for what, kind of like 2 years now. And he's gone from just talking to doing the Donald Trump mannerisms. If you watch him speak now, it's all like doing the stuff. I'm like, that's hilarious. But you gotta develop your own thing after a while, right? You can't be and this is the reason why I don't like when say it's the party of Trump now. I think the party of any person is always a bad idea because people are flawed, but ideas can be really, really good.
I agree.
But I mean,
there is that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there is that saying that when President Trump unfortunately passes, I hope he donates his brain to science and his spine to Republicans, and right. that needs to be true.
Yeah. So I agree with her that they're so disappointing, and because they are supposed to be the people defending at least conservative principles. I mean, like at least that. If they're not going to defend the Bill of Rights and they're not going to defend, fiscal solvency, like could they like at least? I mean, no. It's like we'll get them to get exercised about cross-dressing, or like whatever, drag queens at Story Hour and abortion.
Well, they'll talk about the obvious silly things in the news, like talking about drag queens in any political context is just dumb. That's how far we've regressed. But so Truman and I actually did a live stream on ThinkSpot, and we were taking live questions, and one guy had a brilliant string of questions that went around, when are we going to get out of the left-right paradigm? They're arguing these silly topics in public, but then in the back rooms just agreeing with each other and passing really, really damaging policy while we're all not paying attention.
That's right.
And that's why we talk about like another quote from F.A. Hayek. His book was addressed to the socialists in both parties. Like he recognized that there is a problem in both parties, and it's to their advantage to hide this, to put all this flashy stuff out on Fox News and CNN so they can all complain about the silly stuff while they're in the back rooms passing extraordinarily damaging economic and foreign policy that just goes way under the radar.
Exactly. So, lots of good comments in there. I wish I'd gone through more of them, but you guys are having an awesome conversation over there on the side. I like reading some of them and I'm like, we got smart people over here. Anyway, all right. I think we've probably said all we can say tonight about this.
For sure.
And I have to get up and teach that English class again tomorrow. Did you watch my video on my locals about that?
I did watch your in the car video. I got about halfway through it before I had to jump onto something else. But I can only imagine the frustration. I'm not, I teach a lot. I actually do a bunch of training today, but it's training other engineers. So they have an investment, right? Because they're going to lose their job if they don't pay attention. But I mean, teaching is a hard skill. It's something that we can't just throw away and say we don't need teachers anymore. They're definitely some, a group we need, but they need to teach. They can't just be indoctrination machines and try to become the parents. And I think you do a great job at exposing that and allowing parents like me to see these things for what they are, because even though I've been fairly aware of what's happening, I think people like you really, really help us out.
Well, thanks.
When having that conversation.
And everybody who's watching, if you do not follow Kevin at Engineering Politics, please do. Once again, with feeling, please go check out the locals community, engineeringpolitics.locals.com, and also Engineering Politics YouTube channel. And if you don't already, participate in my locals, I hope you come over there too and check it out. Sure. But yeah, so we'll be back next month and we'll find something else to talk about. Send us a note, you guys. If there are things you want us to riff on, reach out in the comments or, below the video after it's posts, or to the locals communities, his, mine, whichever, because we obviously want to bring you interesting conversations and content. So we got obviously a very smart audience. We'd love to hear from you. All right.
For sure.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks for doing this. And I will
anytime.
see you on the flip side.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.
Bye.